Welcome to the What to Read Next podcast. In this podcast, your host, Lori and me, will interview published authors to chat about their work, journey to getting published, and their book recommendations. If you share a passion for books and always looking for your next read, then join us. I'm Maria. Welcome to the What to Read Next podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Laura.
So excited to have you here. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I really got a very late start on writing. I am almost 60, and so I always say that right up so that anybody out there who's like saying, oh my gosh, I'll never get around to writing if I haven't started by the time I'm 20, I'm here to tell you that is absolute lie. I had things that happened. I was a medieval studies major and then went on and I worked for women's magazines. I, worked for other magazines, had 2 kids, moved to Germany. So there was a lot going on before I started to think about writing.
So what inspired you to become a writer? Like, how did this career came about?
I mean, honestly, I hear a lot of people say things like, I always wanted to be a writer when I was a little kid. I was always very happy being the audience. I loved reading. I didn't feel like I needed to write. And then finally, it wasn't so much about being a writer. It was being a writer for certain stories. It was that the story needed to come out. Not that I knew of. And at some point, that's what happened.
So what was that journey to get the first book published? How do you become a debut author?
I think like most people, I would love to hear the story of the person who wrote their first book, sent it to their first agent, got it published by their first choice publisher. I would love to hear that story because I would brand that a fairy tale the first time out. I actually had written 2 YA books in part of what I imagined to be a trilogy when we were in Germany. And I sent it, because I was a sort of idiot baby writer, I sent it to the only agent I'd ever heard of, which was way too large for an idiot baby writer. But they took it anyway, and they tried to sort of send it around. It didn't go anywhere, which is fine. And then I started to write another book, and I got 3/4 of the way through that, and then this book came to me, and I said, wait, no, wrong story. I'm writing the wrong story. This is the story I should be writing. And I wrote it as a standalone because, again, like an idiot baby writer, I did not understand that there really weren't standalones especially in paranormal. And I sent it to an agent whose daughter went to high school with my son.
Oh, okay.
You never know where those networks are.
Yeah, right? That's a really network.
Yeah. And she liked it, and she took it, and she, sent it around.
So let's talk about paranormal romance, and was your YA paranormal also, or was it just?
It was not. It was. I call it pre-post-apocalypse.
Oh, okay.
Because I always feel like there's this moment when the apocalypse is starting in slow motion. When I was in Germany, the era that really interested me was 32 through 38. And I wondered what it was. What were people thinking as this thing was moving forward? This absolutely awful thing was happening, and they weren't quite understanding how terrible it would be. So that's the kind of thing that I was trying to do, was this kind of pre-post-apocalypse.
I love this. And I feel like there was a market once upon a time. There was
right.
a lot of dystopian, a lot of post-apocalyptic,
right.
of YA.
Yes, exactly.
So there was a market for it. So,
One of these days there may be a market for it again, and then I'll trot that out.
So, what made you decide to write an adult paranormal romance?
Um, a number of things. One, I like paranormal because some people think of paranormal as anything that has magic in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think of it as paranormal in its most original and basic meaning, which is beside normal.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, paranormal means you're like normal's wingman. You're in the passenger seat watching what normal is doing. It's a way of looking at who we are and at our assumptions through this slightly magical lens. So I think that's why I really like paranormal. And in terms of romance, I realized that I was increasingly starting books and having this uneasy feeling that things were not going to end well.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember specifically a book that I really liked called Mrs. Caliban. And now I'm blanking out on the author. But it was really sort of the basis for The Shape of Water.
Mm-hmm.
She falls in love with this monster. And I think I was like 7/8 of the way through, and I knew it was going to go so horribly, and I just didn't want to read that part anymore. I didn't want to see that.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, I want something that in the end is happy.
Yeah.
Or is redemptive or something.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wrote romance. And for adult, I think the sex is fun. I'm an adult. I'm 60. I like the idea of having adults figure things out, not kids who are still sort of tormented by the guy who dropped them at the high school prom. That just does not resonate with me anymore.
Yeah, I think I have a hard time resonating with even college students.
Right.
We're in a college. Hard to resonate. I'm like, just get it together.
Right.
You're 20s. I'm like, your 30s, you feel better, you feel like in a different space. It's just a low maturity that you just look for, and so it makes sense to go for the adult.
Right. Exactly.
There's different levels of angst. It's just you don't want to have the same angst that you have when you're 15.
Exactly.
Exactly. All right, so let's talk about your writing. Do you follow an outline, or do you see where the story leads you?
Okay. Can I tell a story?
Yes, you can.
All right. My first two books, I've always been a pantser, and my first two books, I had the first scene, the last scene, a couple of major scenes in between, and that was it. And I wrote the first two books in 6 months, which for me is pretty good. I'm not a fast writer. And then the third book was coming up, and because I was sort of doing promotion of the first two and various other things, I just gotten distracted. There's also something, just to backtrack, there's also something incredibly pure about writing something that you don't have a contract for.
Mm-hmm.
You can sort of do it as you want. It's carefree, and the anxiety of a deadline is simply not there. And I think you can write faster, honestly. So then I get to my third book. I do have a deadline, and I'm having a lot of problems. It's just going slower than I would like. And I mention this on Twitter, which is the font of all good advice. Is the irony coming across here? I just don't know if the irony is coming across. And so I mentioned it on Twitter, and somebody says, well, you don't outline, and that is your problem. And I said to myself, that makes sense. I don't outline. That's my problem. And I had remembered seeing something that J.K. Rowling did, which was, oh my God, it was magic. You want to talk about magic? This was a magical outline. It had main characters, secondary characters, time of day, props, weather conditions, lighting, you name it. It had 20 different things. I did the same thing. I did exactly that. I thought, this is so brilliant. I did the same thing. And I had spent a lot of time on it. And so then I started to write. And the problem is the characters started to gestate on their own, and they suddenly didn't want to do what I was making them do.
Mm-hmm.
And I would sort of grab them by the scruff, shove them in the outline, and say, this is what you are going to do. But the characters were not puppies, and they refused to, and I spent so much time on that before I finally learned to throw out the outline. I think I kept exactly one thing from that outline, which was, the water is damn cold. And that was it. That was it. I think I wrote 300,000 words to get an 85,000 word book.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So sad. So no, I'm a pantser.
I love that. And I love the fact that you gave it a call to try. It did not work.
It did not work.
So you're like, your style, and that makes sense. So, and even if you just get to know the characters as they come to you, they tell you what's happening, they showcase different things. Do you find yourself, when you had to revisit, you had to revise the plot, do you find yourself cutting things or adding more things?
Okay. Have you ever seen somebody do like a clay bust?
Yeah.
Right. So, they have like a metal structure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like my first draft. And then they cram a lot of clay on there. Yeah. Way more clay.
Yeah.
Than they actually need. And then they start digging away at it. And that's kind of when I visualize my process, that's kind of what it is. There's a lot of cutting away, smoothing out, adding more on to other places. It's not clean. I have such admiration for people who start out and really have it all the way through and then have to make tiny tweaks on their second go through. That is not me.
Yeah. Well, that's fine. Everyone has their own process. You just have to figure out what works for you. Were you originally contracted to do multiple books in a series, or did you sell it as a standalone and were like, oh, we need more books? You were
right. I was originally contracted. I did, again, I imagine this as a standalone.
Yeah.
Named rather unimaginatively Silver.
Oh, okay.
After the lead character.
Yeah.
And then I sold it as a 3-book contract, and I suddenly had to come up with 2 other books. At first I offered them 2 different options. One was a trilogy that followed Silver and Tiberius through all 3 books.
Okay.
And the second was to do all 3 books, but each focusing on a separate character. Thankfully, the editor took the second option because I really realize how complicated it is to do a really good trilogy that follows all the way through. It follows like a set of characters all the way through. You often have a bridge volume in volume 2, or, all the excitement is saved up for volume 3. It's just much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
and then when I was in the middle of doing the 3rd book, I got a contract for another 3. So suddenly I had to I'm like a puppy in the water, desperately trying to figure out, okay, where am I going to insert characters in this volume who I can then use for the subsequent volumes.
So that's a good segue. How do you organize yourself as a writer? How do you keep track of your series, like the characters, the ideas?
I have, while an outline does not work for me going forward, it does work for me to have a spreadsheet as I put characters in. So I, will put in, especially since I have hierarchies, who is the beta of this echelon. So I have all that out. And then I often have like a tiny little thing that gives them some defining characteristic or something from volume 1 that needs to be remembered in subsequent volumes. I have, however, I don't know if anybody will ever notice this, but I have made a mistake, and I knew I was making it. I changed somebody's eye color between volume 1 and volume 3, and nobody's called me on it yet, but I'm just waiting for them to do that.
It's all good. You know, like, when you're writing a book, like you don't think about it. I talk to authors, and a lot of times they don't envision the series to be 5, 6, 7 books long.
Right.
When you start writing book 1, you're like, unless you're like, the ending of this epic,
Right.
like chances are you're not, and so you may not keep track of things, and you may have like, I think I interviewed Sam McLean, and she said that she had in one book she named one character one way, and by book 3 it was a different name of the character. It's the same character, very different name. Like, just like it happened,
Right.
So, like,
well, you're keeping I made a mistake of making this pack with 400 wolves, which if I were to go back and slap myself silly back then, I would have said, let's keep it to a more manageable, like 200 or something. But so there are a lot, I don't have them all named, obviously, but there are a lot of sort of secondary, tertiary characters.
so how do you come up with the names, actually? So
I actually spend way too much time on most of the names.
okay.
So Silver was because she's a silver wolf, and because in the old tongue they speak an version of Old English. She's Quicksilver, and Quicksilver means lively or alive, like the quick and the dead. And Quicksilver just means live silver, and I just liked that as a name. Tiberius is a different kind of werewolf, and all of them have Latinate names. They all have Roman names. So his father is August, and since August's stepson was Tiberius, it made sense that August's son would be Tiberius. Elijah, it's like Elijah in the wilderness in the Bible, except in this case, the wilderness is New York City, and he's suffering in that wilderness. They all have names. My favorite is Thea Philolobos, because Thea Philolobos means goddess of the city of wolves. And I just thought that was right.
Yeah.
So.
I love this. I'm always fascinated when, like, how do authors come up with a name? Like, did the name come to you? Like, do you research? Right. And your names are so, like, they're so complicated. Like,
well, and Evie, who is the alpha and is is the heroine of this book, of book 4, Season of the Wolf, I had not thought I was going to be writing her story. I thought I was ending at book 3. And I had named her after somebody I had admired greatly as a teenager. So she's got the one name. She's like the main character, but the one name that comes really from just somebody I admired.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
So let's talk about writing. Like, what's your writing process looks like? Like, when are you writing? Now during the pandemic, now that people are at home, so you may not have, hours on end of like silence.
It used to be that I would wake up first thing in the morning before the kids got up and do a little bit of writing. And then when I got them off to school, do a little bit more writing. Now, of course, there's no getting anybody off to school. So I really am finding myself trying to sneak in 5 minutes wherever I can. I have to say that half the time when I say I'm going to use the bathroom, I do that because it's a moment of privacy when I can sit there and write for 5 minutes.
Oh my God.
And I have in this 4th volume, one of the things about the alpha is that she's always got calls on her attention. Yeah. So there's always somebody yelling, "Alpha, Alpha." and for me, this was kind of a recurring theme in my own life. Mom, mom.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So,
All right, so let's talk about Legend of the Wolf series. What was your source of inspiration?
um, I had been reading. I just gotten something out of a library. It had a great cover. Do I remember what it was? No. It was not one of my go-to writers. And it had a story, it was all about how the wolves were sort of the evil side. It was more like the Mr. Hyde to the human Dr. Jekyll. And and I thought, is that really fair to wolves? Is that really what they're like? Yes, we have competed with them for a long time for resources, but that does not make them evil. And I thought, supposing I wanted to do something that emphasized that they aren't evil. And so I thought, supposing I made them they made them wolves first and foremost, and their human side was only something that they brought out, that they used because they knew they had to survive in a world where the humans are the alpha predators. They had to be able to pass as alpha predators too. And then that led to everything else.
Yeah, so werewolves are unique. Like it's like it's a whole take on werewolves. Like it's not what we normally read in paranormal, where it's like werewolf that shifts like a few days of the year, and it's
right.
Like no, like they have alpha pack, and you set them in Canada.
Well, they
some
start.
of them.
The shifters start in Canada,
Yeah.
but the main pack is based in the Adirondacks,
Okay.
in upstate New York. So that's where they are. I didn't want to do exactly what you're talking about, which is the werewolf who has 6 hours where he's chains himself to the basement with a meat locker full of raw steak and sort of sits out his change, because that wasn't going to give me the sense of the wildness and sort of the glory of being wild. So I wanted to make it slightly longer, like 3 days, and where the whole pack, you can't be wild in Boston for 3 days. That's not going to work. So they all had to keep coming together every month. They had to be together because I wanted to emphasize again the importance of pack. So, when they have a mating ceremony, it's called a braiding, because they braid together the 3 strands of the land, the pack, and the mated wolves themselves. So I wanted to make sure that all 3 of those elements were sort of consistently there.
And so each of the books follow a couple, but they're also a pack, arc.
Right. Right.
You want to get the happily ever after of the pack.
Exactly.
So how do you manage to balance both, like getting both stories to make sure that they make sense?
It was easier when again, when you have a trilogy, then I had this idea of how that was going to work out. But then I get another 3, and the ultimate villain of the first 3 is, no spoilers really, but the ultimate villain of the first trilogy is no longer available to be a villain. So I had to sort of start over. And part of the thing that, while I was looking at that arc, I was also looking at the arc of the characters within it, because I don't want to go through the same struggle. I don't want every pair of characters to have the same struggle. I want them each to have some new thing that they have to work on. In this 5th one that I'm writing right now, the heroine had always been sort of a shifter princess. She had been taken care of by the men in her life. But she had also always been discounted by the men in her life. She had been an adjunct. Nobody had paid really attention to her. They treated her as, a pretty arm candy type thing. And so I needed her to, this is her own particular struggle where she starts to feel, I can be dangerous. I am allowed to be dangerous. And that's her path. So that's very important for me to have these different paths for each set of characters.
I'm excited for book 5. I'm like, book 5 is really good. I know you're writing it right now, but I'm like,
Right.
just have it now.
Thank you.
So let's talk about A Seasons of Love. It follows a few days. That's actually the question. So Seasons of Love is book 4 in the series, and it follows a few days after that they attack to the pack, where we have shifted prisoners. That's where the story set out. Tell us, what can we expect from the story? Now that you completed one arc, and you're like, I gotta write 3 more books.
Right. Well, this is slightly a reset, because you can't just, I kind of feel like you can't just go from one anxiety-producing explosion to another anxiety-producing explosion. And also because it follows the alpha, it could, if they were in the middle of some horrible crisis, she would not have been able to allow herself to let go enough to fall in love. I honestly just don't think she could have done it. That would not have made sense for who she was. And then the hero, it was mostly about, for the hero, he had sort of conflicting problems. One, he was afraid of women who had been made small, because his mother had been made very small. She had become a very small woman and then exploded. And August's wife, who is the new villain, had also been made very small. As one character says, there's only so small you can make a strong woman before she explodes. They're like stars that way. And so he's both afraid of small women, which is why part of why he's attracted to the pack, but he also doesn't quite understand that being in love with someone as grand as Evie requires a larger love. You cannot just have her be in your orbit. That doesn't work. You have to have a larger love, one that is big enough for the entire pack and the land. So he has to learn that, which is a painful process.
I am excited for book 5. Because book 4 sets up the story that is like, it sets up these arcs that's happening. You're like, no, I need to know what comes next. Do you see yourself, like, if the publisher comes back and says 3 more books, do you see yourself like keep writing in this world, or do you have ideas for other stories?
I think often when you have somebody who writes paranormal, they have so many varieties of magic and that you can keep going forever.
Yeah.
I don't, and I didn't want to bring in like, oh, well, this turns out to be a fairy, and this turns out, I didn't want to do that, because I wanted to make it seem almost realistic, almost like, yes, there could be people like this living in our world. So that's what I really wanted. And so I think if I were to do 9 books, I'm not sure that would be possible to keep spinning out like that. Besides, I have ideas for a couple of other things, and so we'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, I think it's tough, because the paranormal is one of those genres that are just like, series are like really long, and those spin off from those series are like, so you're like 10, 15, 30, 50 bucks. Like, it's like, I don't know how you do it. And we buy the world. So
right. And also for me, the funnest part is thinking of the world, is trying to figure out if this is true, then this must happen as well. Like if wolves are hated, and this is a hated pack, what does that mean for them? Well, I think they're very conservative. I think they're very suspicious. I think they hold on to their old ways, their old laws, their old languages, their old stories. So that helps me build this world. That's what I really, I like building the world and building the relationship at the same time. And once the world is built, it does two things. One, there's no more to really build. And second is you've painted yourself into a corner. You now have so many restrictions on what will and will not happen that, it just becomes much harder to move.
Yeah. Oh God. Thank you for sharing this. Like, I think I'm always fascinated when authors create these like magical worlds or like different worlds that are different from other, and then
Right.
the whole process that comes about, and the restraints that happen, as you create the world.
Right.
You create different things. Like, okay,
Right.
it's not tomorrow. So now let's go to our round of book recommendations, an opportunity for sharing with our audience what they should read next. What is your favorite genre?
I really love paranormal, but I also am very big on fantasy romance. So fantasy romance isn't as big a genre as paranormal, but I think it has some really great writers in it. And I'm just going to talk about what I have been reading during the pandemic that has really helped me. And this is the other thing about fantasy romance is that it is really transporting. It really takes you away from whatever is normal. You're not going to find it there. So, I read the Grace Draven's books, The Wraith Kings, which started with Radiance, and Eidolon. And I know that she is writing another book, which I think is called The Epos King, and that will be coming out whenever she's ready for it. So that was fantastic. I also reread the Dragonkin series by G.A. Aiken, who is Shelley Lawrenson, but it's all dragon shifters. And one of my absolute all-time favorite books, period, is Dragon Actually. I reread that at least once a year. And I had read The Blacksmith Queen recently. And in The Blacksmith Queen, there is a tiny throwaway line which says, "Don't they have that human queen, the crazy one?" And I know when they say that they're referring to the heroine of Dragon Actually, which is Anwil the Bloody. I mean, it has to be. It just has to be. So I went back and reread those. I have also been reading Jeffe Kennedy's. She had The Orchid Throne and Fiery Crown, which I loved. Those were so fantastic. And The Promised Queen is coming sometime shortly, so I can't wait to read that. I also reread Amanda Boucher's Kingmaker Chronicles because I know she is coming up with a spin-off tale of Kato, who's a great character in the beta team. I mean, it's not really about the main characters. It's not Kat and Griffin in the first three, but it's a spin-off character. And then I also started reading something I know is Western. I don't think I've ever read a Western in my life except for Lonesome Dove. And Carrie Lindell, who is also a source books writer, died recently after like a 6-year battle with cancer. And I had never known that. She was just such a wonderful, generous colleague. But she was actually also a rodeo competitor. And she knows this world else. So when I dive into this world, it's called it's Texas Rodeo is the name of the series, and the book I started with was Reckless in Texas, the first one. And I have to say again, like fantasy romance, it takes me to a place that is so divorced that it might as well be fantasy romance. But it's wonderful. It's wonderful. She's got a great writing style.
love these.
So-
I love all these recommendations. And I even remember Jeffy Kennedy. I interviewed her last year, and she's a pantser because I was like, it
Mhm.
makes sense. Like when she was like, pantser, I was like, oh, it makes so sense. I was like, how do you come up?
That's right.
The story came to me, and I'm like,
Right.
oh. It's like such an
Exactly.
intricate world. Like,
Yeah.
so,
I love that. I love seeing a world being built like that. It is just amazing. And actually, I was shocked when I first heard she was a pantser because the plots, in fact, for this series, you feel like the plots have this real arc, like it's been carefully planned out, and there's a keystone, and there's this. Apparently not.
yeah. I was so surprised. I was like, but I thought you knew what was going to happen.
Right, exactly.
Like, it makes so much sense. But so.
Oh, wait, can I add one more that I suddenly forgot? Because this was actually crucially important. This was especially important to me during the pandemic, which was Alona Andrews' Innkeeper Chronicles. Which is not, I know, I love Alona Andrews, but this is one that nobody or fewer people know about.
Yeah.
And it is about a witch. I mean, I'm using air quotes for those who can't see, because she is they're really aliens, is the truth. But she's a witch, and there's a guy who's a werewolf, etc. But the main part of it is that she has a house, and her power stems from that house, and she will do anything that she has to protect anyone who's inside her house. And during the pandemic, this has really spoken to me as a thing. You're stuck in your house, your power is only in your house, and you have got to protect those inside. And she even has these characters, the hero, which are, a sort of awkward creature that smells bad and has bad language skills, and they have these little secret sadnesses, and anybody who's been living with teenagers will feel the hero and really empathize with them. So that is my sort of pandemic specific recommendation.
You need to pick that one up. I've been watching their Hidden Legacy series.
Right, which is wonderful.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I want to go back to the backlist. Like, it's so good. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now I need to try the pandemic book.
Right, exactly.
So tell us where you can find you online.
Okay, I have a very poor Facebook presence, but it's there, and it's just Maria Vale, I think. And then I'm at Maria Vale Author on Twitter and also on Instagram. And I'm mariavale.com is my website. And I do a once a month newsletter which says stuff about mythology and wolves and and recommendations, stuff like that. So relatively painless.
Thank you, Maria, for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Laura. This was wonderful.
If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with friends, subscribe, or rate and review the show. This is the easiest way to support this podcast. Want to join a romance-loving community? Want weekly book recommendations, monthly author Q&As, and book recommendation meetups? Make new friends? Then join our Patreon community. To sign up, please follow the links in the show notes. What to Read Next podcast is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts to love on frolic.media/podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.